join us with the Pledge of Allegiance? Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
About 3:30 this afternoon, I was called by the chairman and asked to sit in for him tonight, and it was kind of a shock. Got out of my tractor, thought I would get a shower. The one thing I am happy about is I was able to bring with me tonight this ceremonial gavel that my great-grandfather had as the chairman of the Board of Selectmen in the town of Medford some 130 years ago, and I used it several years ago when I was chairman of the committee. Would like to get the approval of the minutes of August 4th.
So moved. Second.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? I'd like to get an approval of the minutes of the September 2nd meeting.
So moved. Second.
Any discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye, opposed? Thank you very much. At this point in time in the meeting, we have a opportunity for anyone from the public who wants to speak on any issue that's not on the agenda. Is there anyone here at the audience who'd like to speak and come to that podium right there? Keith? And please identify yourself when you come to speak. You can take it off if you want to. And just, also, please wipe the microphone after you've spoken. You can adjust the arm up higher, I think. Should be an adjustment there.
I typically don't need a microphone.
I think you can take your mask off if you're far enough away from people.
I just said I typically don't need a microphone, but I appreciate one for the cameras. My name is Keith Lucy, 7 Ashley Lane. Been in town for 27 years. Sat on the Board of Selectmen for 9 of those 27. I addressed you as a board maybe 2 weeks ago, a little more than a week and a half ago. And at that time, I asked you to, I was actually very surprised that you chose to take a vote that night, but I'm glad that you did. Let us know where you stood. You know, like I said that night, nothing really has been wrong about what's gone on so far. The process is underway, and I think you understand that, Mr. Clark. Your comments, I went back and I watched them the next night, and the only thing I want to object to is I think you referred to me as an enemy. Please don't do that. Please don't think of me that way.
I couldn't hear you, sir.
What's that?
What was that? I didn't hear you.
You referred to someone that you would refer to as your enemy, and I don't want to be known as that. I took it personally. I'm sensitive now. I'm very sensitive. So my point is, I don't want to be referred to as anyone's enemy in this town. I really don't. Especially on an issue like this. I've worked with Steve in the past. I thought I was helpful when it came to the Smith School funding issue, reading the town, understanding the town, knowing where the town stood and what the town would go for and what the town wouldn't go for. So I think I tried to be, as I try to stay out of the spotlight, I really think I try to be as helpful as possible. But I'm here tonight to address, of course, the issue of the thin blue line flag. For years, the thin blue line flag has been used to demonstrate dignity and respect for law enforcement officials nationwide. In particular, it is used to show respect for fallen officers that have been killed in the line of duty. Since 2016, there have been 170 law enforcement officials feloniously killed in the line of duty. 170 law enforcement officials feloniously killed in the line of duty. Every 10 days, a law enforcement official is killed in this country, and their lives deserve all the respect and all of the dignity that we can provide. Recently, the Danvers Board of Selectmen voted to affirm the decision of the town manager to order the thin blue line flags removed from fire apparatus. That decision and vote demonstrate their complete lack of respect for our police officers and firefighters. Ms. Bernard accepted. To rectify this horrific act of disrespect, we have formed the Citizens to Restore Respect of First Responders in the town of Danvers. Our first act is to petition the town to hold a special town meeting to cause the town meeting members to meet, discuss, debate, and vote to see if the town meeting body will authorize the use and display of the thin blue line flag on fire and other public safety apparatus. The four organizers of this citizens group are, and I believe they're all here tonight, Rick Betancourt, town meeting member, Dana Michael Hagan, town meeting member and retired police officer with 42 years of service, 42 years of service to this town. Myself, Keith Lucy, former Board of Selectmen member, and Mark Zubrick, current town meeting member and also a former member of the Board of Selectmen. Our group is growing. Yesterday, we delivered a petition with over 450 signatures to the Danvers Town Clerk. Thank you for your help, Kathy. It was a beautiful day. If it was raining out, it would have been a little worse. It was a beautiful day out there. And tonight, we deliver that same petition directly to the Board of Selectmen. I'm sure that board members understand Massachusetts General Law, Chapter 39, Section 10, calls for a special town meeting to be held no later than 45 days after receipt of this petition. We've already been in communication with the town clerk's office and asked that the special town meeting be scheduled to comply with that requirement. We welcome any and all inquiries to please reach out to us at restorerespectindanvers@gmail.com or join our Facebook group at Restoring Respect and Dignity in Danvers. Restoring Respect and Dignity in Danvers. Our group, whether it's online or in person, operates with two simple rules. Anyone that has a demonstrated history of disrespect, particularly towards our first responders, will be denied entry into this group. Anyone that shows disrespect towards first responders or others while a member of this group will be removed from the group. We look forward to a robust and respectful debate on this topic. Thank you. If I have permission, I'd like to
Thank you,
deliver
Mr.
this
Lucy.
to you.
And I understand that Kathy's already got a copy of this, is that correct?
She does. And again, thank you for being outside yesterday, but I'd like to deliver this directly to you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. Okay, is there anyone else in the audience
you.
that wants to speak on a different issue or another issue? Okay, we'll go on. The next piece of business is the board will vote to accept two gifts in accordance with Mass General Laws, Chapter 44, Paragraph 53A. Mr. Town Manager?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You have two gifts to accept this evening. Both are memorial benches, one to be placed at Endicott Park in memory of Dolores Gallant, and the second is a bench to be placed in the public way at the end of Mead Street in memory of Bruce and Martha Eaton.
Is there any discussion on this issue? Mr. Mills?
Nothing, thank you.
Mr. Trask?
Nothing, thank you.
Maureen?
No, all set.
Okay. I entertain a motion to accept this.
Mr. Chairman, I move we accept the gift of Lois McKenzie with an appropriate letter of appreciation.
Is there a second?
Second?
Any discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Another motion for the other gift?
Mr. Chairman, I move we accept the gift from Mandy Navarro with an appropriate letter of recognition.
Is there a second?
Second?
Any discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you very much. Item number 4, a public hearing will be held on application of American Multi-Cinema, Inc., DBA AMC Theater, Liberty Tree Mall, 100 Independence Way, Lyda Parsons, manager, for a change of officers and directors at that location. Is there someone here to speak for that? Sorry.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members. Andrew Upton for the applicant. I come before you tonight with the exciting news that the treasurer of AMC Theaters is being replaced. Mr. Ramsey is retiring. Mr. Goodman will replace him. All of this will occur at the corporate headquarters in Overland Park, Kansas. But a filing is mandated by the ABCC, even though there will be no change to any aspect of the operation of the license Danvers or any AMC theater in Massachusetts.
Thank you. Any comments, David? Gardner?
No, thank you.
No, all set.
Maureen? No? This is a public hearing. Does anyone in the audience want to speak to this?
I move we close the public hearing.
Motion is made. Is there a second? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye, opposed? What is the rule of the item of the board?
I move we accept the application as presented.
Is there a second? Any more discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye, opposed? Thank you very much. Thank you, good luck.
All right, thank you.
Number 5, a public hearing will be held on the application of Marriott Boston North Operator LLC DBA Doubletree, Boston North Shore, 50 Village Drive. Kevin R. Var, manager, for a transfer of all alcoholic common victuals license to that location. Is there someone here to speak to that, sir? Yes.
Yes, good evening. I'm Kevin Barr. I'm the general manager for the Doubletree. And we recently took over management with Merit Hospitality, being the new management company from Interstate Hotels.
So you have a new person, okay. Is there any, Gardner, any comments?
Just one question. I assume, Mr. Var, that you'll be moving locally and not working out of Vienna, Virginia?
Correct. I'm currently living in the hotel and looking for real estate as we speak.
Very good. Thank you. That's the only question I have.
Okay, Maureen?
All set.
David? No questions, okay, this is a public hearing. Is there any comments from the audience?
Mr. Chairman, I move we close the public hearing.
Is there a second? Second. All in favor, say aye.
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 Opposed? Thank you. Is there a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move we accept the application as presented.
Is there a second? Second. Any discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Item number 6, a public hearing will be held on the application of Braccia Inc., DBA 466 Pub and Grill. Richard Braccia, General Manager, 466 Newbury Street. Richard Braccia, General Manager, for an alteration of licensed premises, all alcoholic common victuals license at that location. Yes, sir.
I'd just like to thank the board for hearing our request for
Would you please
renovation.
identify yourself?
Oh, I'm sorry, Richard Brasha, General Manager of the 466 Public Grill. Just like to thank the board for hearing our request for renovation.
Do you want to expand on that?
Well, we're just doing a renovation of the interior of the restaurant. We've been there for 26 years. We're trying to take advantage of this,
Please speak up a little more for our
trying to take
audience.
advantage of this time in our limited capacity when we're closed down to do some much needed renovations to the building.
Okay.
The inside of the building.
What kind of renovations are you doing exactly?
We're taking a wall down, we're upgrading our bathrooms to fully handicapped bathrooms. Pretty much mostly aesthetic.
Because I was trying to read it, okay.
Mr. Mills? Mr. Trask?
We got a plan. Unfortunately, is the wall the one that used to be between the bar and the dining
Yes,
area?
it is.
Okay. You're removing that, and you're upgrading handicap. Okay, thank you. I'm all
This is a
set.
public hearing. Is there any comments from the audience?
Mr. Chairman, I move we close the public hearing.
Is there a second? Any discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Is there a motion?
Don't want to hog the spotlight, but if there's no one else, Mr. Chairman, I move we accept the application as presented.
Any more discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you very much and good luck.
Thank you very much.
Take advantage of the time off. Thank you very much for seeing that. Number 7, the board is in receipt of an application from Netcast Church DBA Netcast, 100 Independence Way. Beth Tuning, manager, for a common victuals license at that location.
Hey, dude, my name is Matt Tuning. I'm a lead pastor at Netcast Church.
I'm Beth Tuning.
Eh.
I run the Network Coffee Shop.
We moved into Liberty Tree Mall, took over about 20,000 square feet. Started the project about 18 months ago. About 3,000 square feet in the front. The storefront is going to be a coffee shop, and we're excited about the opportunity to be there.
Very good. Maureen, any questions?
The hours of operation,
now, we're looking at 11 to 5, but after COVID, we're hoping to be open whenever mall hours are open. And we're closed on Sunday, but we still give free coffee away while the church is meeting to anybody in the mall.
Is this before or after the sermon?
Before, for sure, to keep everybody awake.
Okay, David? Gardner?
No, I have no questions. Good luck.
Thank you.
And I have no questions. Good luck to you.
Thank you very much.
Is there a motion from the board?
Mr. Chairman, I move we accept the application as presented.
Is there a second? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye, opposed? Thank you very much, and good luck.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
The board will consider a proclamation to identify itself as Danvers Select Board. You going to read that, Maureen? Mr. Bartha, did you designate someone that you wanted to have to read that?
This was prepared at the request of the chairman at the last meeting. I would be happy to read it if you'd like someone to read it, but it was just, he reviewed it and approved it, but wanted to have it considered this evening.
Maureen, can you look to it?
Sure. January 2020, the Massachusetts Selectmen's Association voted to formally to be known as the Massachusetts Select Board Association, and 96 towns in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts have taken similar action, and a name change to the Danvers Select Board would be used in matters of general correspondence, on business cards, website, and the like, and there would be no changes made or proposed to the legislatively enacted, Danvers Town Manager Act now. We, the Board of Selectmen, in the interest of inclusivity and having held public discussions of this topic, to hereby proclaim that we shall be called the Danvers Select Board on the 15th day of September 2020 and moving forward.
Is there any discussion on this item? David?
I'm in favor of this. You know, I asked Diane Langley a couple of years ago if she would be more comfortable if we were the select board, and she said, not really. So I never followed up anything then, so I am in favor of this, and if we need to adopt it, I hope that we do.
Thank you, David. Gardner?
No questions, no comments.
Maureen?
No, I think it's great. Thank you.
Okay, and I was talking to the town manager this afternoon, and my one observation was that I hope that the town manager would see fit to reprint new business cards, right, referring to this for all of us on the board. Is there a vote to accept this proclamation?
So moved.
Second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you very much. The board will consider appointing a member to the new Preservation Commission. At this point, I would like the town manager to kind of explain what's been going on with this.
I can take a crack at it. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We also have Aaron Henry and David Fields from the Land Use and Community Services Department. This updated charge is a reflection of the fact that we have had a hard time keeping this particular committee staffed in recent years. And because the work that this, I'm having an awfully hard time with my microphone. The work that goes before the Preservation Commission routinely makes its way to the Planning Board, the Conservation Commission, or in rare cases, the Select Board. So the idea to shake up the committee a bit was to have each of the major regulatory boards appoint one of their own members to serve on that committee and be joined by 2 standing members and an associate member, which happens to be the head count that we currently have on the committee. Sandra Lane, Andrew Barnum, and Bill Nicholson has volunteered to serve as the associate member on that committee. So the Planning Board and the ZBA are taking up similar conversations right now in advance of the next scheduled meeting, which is on September 22nd. And we have business items before the committee at that point. So the request tonight is that the board consider appointing one of its members to serve on this committee. And I know the chairman has expressed interest to me in that, and he wanted that to be conveyed to the group as well tonight.
Thank you. Any comments, David? Gardner?
Nope, no comments.
Maureen?
I nominate Dan Bennett.
Maureen is nominating Dan Bennett for that position. Dan has expressed interest in serving in this position. Is there a second?
Second the nomination.
Okay, any more discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you. Town manager will notify Mr. Bennett that he
I
will notify Mr. Bennett, thank you.
The
And
board
actually,
will-
I can notify land use staff of their new member. They happen to be here this evening, so.
The board will receive, whoa, this,
Someone's mic is really
how
hot.
do we get, someone's running the sound system a little, back there.
They got it. Could I ask that the speaker adjust the mic so it's right close to him, and he's welcome to remove his mask while he speaks, so for clarity.
As I spent the weekend in a hockey rink with the rest of New England, I think I'm going to protect you all by leaving it on if that's acceptable, because
Before you
I
start,
saw every license.
Aaron, before you start, the board will receive an overview from the staff of the various zoning articles being considered for the November 16th, 2020 special town meeting, and consider a date by which to close the warrant. I think it is appropriate, and I hope it isn't illegal, that people take the masks off when they're trying to speak into a microphone. People at home are having a very difficult time understanding what we're saying. This is one of the reasons I've taken mine off tonight. If you don't feel safe doing it, I understand. Mr. Henry.
I apologize. I really saw
That's
every
fine.
plate from New England this weekend, and it's been inside of 72 hours, so I would prefer to protect you from me, because I'm not
That's
sure
fine.
I'm clear right
Sure.
now.
Could we ask that you pull the mic closer, though?
Yep. How is that?
Better.
All right. Give you a short presentation. David Fields, our planning director, will do the bulk of the talking, but I at least want to do a first couple of slides for you to kind of bring you up to speed on what we've been working on since February's town meeting. So again, go over a timeline that we've been working with Mr. Bartha on, go through the updates. You received all of the proposals now, so both the planning board and the board of selectmen have seen the drafts as they exist at this moment. We'll continue to work on those as we get closer to town meeting, but you now have all the materials. So this presentation itself won't dive into anything, but of course we are happy to take specific and detailed questions should you have any. And hopefully the presentation, we can go over a little bit of our reasoning as to why we're attacking these things, and then hopefully we engender some conversation with you and get some feedback. And I apologize, it's a little harder to read than it is on my screen. Basically, here we are tonight in early September, and all draft materials have been distributed to the selectmen and the planning board, the select board and the planning board. We will be opening public hearings at the planning board as statutorily required on September 22nd. We believe at this time that you'll be voting on the warrant on October 9th. We will do our utmost to give you planning board positions at that time, but as you can see from the calendar, we're trying to do a lot in a fairly compressed time frame. So we have the next two meetings of the planning board, the 13th of October and the 27th of October, scheduled to wrap up those public hearings and finalize positions. Clearly, in between there, on October 20th, the select board will be meeting again to review the warrant. And we hope that we will have positions, if not actual reports for you from the planning board and their position on these articles. And I'll take a quick diversion here just to bring up a topic, something that David and I are trying to introduce into the Danvers process a little bit. Chapter 40A requires, there is an escape clause, but generally speaking, 40A contemplates the planning board providing a recommendation report, either written or verbal, to town meeting itself. And that's something this town has not traditionally done. And if you don't issue a report, there's another issue that comes up, and this town has kind of gone that way. We think it would be very helpful to both the select board and the finance committee if you had a little bit of something from the planning board explaining why we took these amendments on and what ultimately we were, how the board voted on those articles. So this year we're going to try to kind of start to work that in. So again, deliberate on the 20th. We hope to at least have for you the positions that the planning board is taking on these articles, and a little bit of an explanation as to why they're doing so. Then moving into early November, the Finance Committee will be meeting on November 5th to take their warrant review positions. If we have to, if it goes this late, November 10th is our drop dead date to kind of finalize planning board positions. And then we'll be holding the town meeting members workshop on Saturday, November 14th, before returning to town meeting on Monday, November 16th for the vote. So if there are no questions on timeline, and again, hopefully the planning board will be able to move through, we've shown you here 3 weeks to cover this material. We're hoping we can do it in 2 meetings, but always want to give ourselves a little bit of leeway if possible. So again, since February, a few of the things we've been working on, really just making sure internal consistency is there, and some issues that we've seen and experienced around site plan approval process. Finding that we're either missing a number of definitions that the bylaw could really use. In some cases, we have duplicit definitions where I'll pick on open space. I think we have 3 different definitions of open space in the bylaw. And those all become problematic when trying to enforce and interpret. And then there's some issues around special permitting, which we'll get into momentarily, that we'd like to modernize. Other rules and bylaws that we've been working on, traffic rules and regulations. You've been hearing about that probably for a while. COVID definitely interrupted the workflow on that. I am working on that as chair of the Traffic Commission. Just preparing final, making it look as pretty as possible for you. That should be to you by the end of September. David and his staff has been working with the electric division on a 5G wireless communication initiative. I'm not sure when that'll be ready, but just to give you a heads up on what we've been working on. Mr. Fields and Georgia Pendergast have been working on some tweaks to the wetlands bylaw and the companion set of regulations that the Conservation Commission uses to interpret that bylaw and kind of flesh that out. Mr. Fields has been working with the planning board on zoning regulations, and this is something, again, that Danvers has typically not had, that we've introduced as part of last spring's adoption of the character-based zoning districts. But basically, right now, the bylaw contains things like the number of copies you have to submit to us, what should be on each sheet, and if we want to tweak that, which again, I would say it's been quite a while since some of those things have been amended, we'd have to go to town meeting for that. And best practice in Massachusetts, and we're kind of an outlier on that, would be those things go in your board's regulations as opposed to the actual bylaw. The bylaw sets the big rules. The regulations tell us how many copies, when you need to submit, et cetera, and kind of the nitty gritty, but not the rules themselves. So we've been moving material, or suggesting to move material out of the bylaw and into the planning board regulations. And David's done a lot of work on that. And finally, we've been working with the engineering division on stormwater. One of the things we want to see is, depending on the scale of your project, if you're before the planning board, you're going to look at the zoning bylaw and maybe our regulations for what the standards are for stormwater. If your project happens to be in a resource area, then you're going to, those standards are trumped by the wetlands bylaw and the state's Wetland Act. But if you're maybe not in either of those cases, but you are disturbing more than an acre, then you might have to go to engineering for the pollutant discharge permit, or the stormwater permit that they regulate. And so we've been trying to work as a group to figure out how can we come up with a more uniform set of rules around stormwater, because really the science is strong enough now to tell us we know what works and we know what doesn't work. Let's make sure that regardless of what venue you find yourself in, the project is getting a uniform review with modern standards. And since we started this conversation, we've kind of taken a backseat as engineering has really taken the bull by the horns, and I think we'll be working on a much more comprehensive overhaul of the stormwater regs than we originally anticipated. So that's a good thing from our perspective to kind of unify those. And I think with that, I think I can turn it over to David. I'll just hit my computer a little bit with the sanitizer. Okay, now David can walk us through the proposals that you found in your packet.
Thank you very much, and good evening. Thanks for having us. Thank you for the intro, Aaron. So, as Aaron was stating a little earlier, I'll jump right in because we'd like to get to questions and discussion. But just right off the bat, I'd like to say that what we are presenting is really just updates to existing bylaws. There's not much new material here. We're just trying to modernize, edit, and bring things up to conformity. So none of these should really knock your socks off necessarily. In fact, I argue some of them are pretty vanilla. But I'll start with this one, section 2, called administration, which, as I said, is fairly thrilling. So what we're proposing to do is add a section to the bylaw that would allow us to update pagination in the book, change any headings if they need to get changed, and typos. So basically going through and using the ability to cross-reference within the book and not having to go back to town meeting every time to say, we have duplicate page 7s, we need to change page 7 to page 8, etc. So we would be able to do that, then republish the bylaw online, and everyone would get a copy. It's not something we're looking to do all the time, but it would get fairly tedious to come back to every single town meeting to update headings and whatnot. We're adding a severability clause. We currently don't have one, so that would really just allow different portions of the book to act independently, and it's not as though if one thing gets struck down, the whole book would be wiped out. So I thought that was a necessary thing we sort of needed. And then we're updating the planning board powers and duties. So those have not changed. The planning board still has the same powers and duties they've had since planning board started to exist in the 50s. It's just not explicitly stated in our current bylaw. So it says what the ZBA can do, but it doesn't say anywhere what the powers and duties of the planning board are. So we'd just like to add those, just again to keep ourselves clean and cover all bases. The next section, so we're just going to go through section by section based on numeration. So site plan review is section 4. This one, again, this section already exists, but this would be a large overhaul of the bylaw. So right now we have a 3-tiered system. It's administrative site plan review, and then we have major and minor modifications. There's really not that much of a difference between those major and minor modifications, especially for what the applicant has to do in order to get in front of the planning board. So we'd like to collapse those and just have a 2-tiered system moving forward, so hopefully we're successful with that. And then we're moving a lot of the design requirements, which in the current book are really a lot of landscaping requirements, so it specifies what types of trees and shrubs, how many, how tall they need to be when you plant them. We'd like to move that out of the actual zoning bylaw itself and put it in the planning board regulations. And that's simply to clean up the book, but also there's a few things in there that they could be invasive species that maybe when site plan review was introduced were in vogue, and then we come to find out later that they're actually detrimental. So we'd like the ability to change those species types without having, again, to go back to town meeting to change from a Bartlett fair to a standard fair.
Excuse me, David.
Yep.
Yeah, are there any questions from people? We should really be going section by section here. At this point, are there any questions from members of the board?
This is just a draft. Is this drafts?
Yeah.
Okay.
These are all
So
drafts.
I saw some things in, yeah.
We haven't even opened the public hearings yet. So.
Thank you. Gardner?
So on this and other sections, are there any substantive changes? And if there are people who have gotten permits or granted variances or whatever the condition is, grandfathered in as to what they can do? Like off-street parking, did you make a change to off-street parking that would change, what someone may have already been approved for? And if they come up for a modification, just like a ZBA has pre-existing conditions or grandfathered conditions, they can carry? Does that hold for the changes that are being made here?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. We haven't made any changes to, I guess you'd call them requirements. So parking standards aren't changing, massing and height or anything like that aren't changing. We're not changing the size or shape of lots. It's really mostly process-based. So like I said, this one probably has the most edits, section 4, and it's there's nothing in there that's substantive that would make a lot non-conforming based on what we're doing. That being said, if we were changing those things, they would be grandfathered, but we're not attempting to do that.
Thank you.
Yep.
Proceed.
So sections 18 through 22, Aaron mentioned earlier, that's the newest zoning we have that was passed in February for town meeting. It may seem a little odd that we're trying to update that now since we just passed it. However, that was adding, I think, 97 pages to the bylaw total. So we did go through after and noticed once we started implementing the bylaw, there's a few cross-reference errors and internal references. So we'd like to update those just for the sake of doing it early rather than waiting and let it linger. And I know I just mentioned before, we'd like to add a clause that would allow us to do that. However, should one of these not be successful, I don't want both of them not happening. So that was the reason for adding this. Hopefully we're successful with everything, but if we're not, at least we can get this update through so we can move forward with the new zoning cleanly. Any questions on that?
Okay.
Section 33 is what's currently known as our clusters subdivision bylaw. Again, this is a pretty large overhaul. So what clusters do, they allow you to basically take what would be a standard subdivision, make the lots a little bit smaller and tighten things up with the trade-off that the town generally gets some open space. So there's a little bit of a cost benefit to the developer, there's a little bit of a benefit to the town in that they get some more green space than they otherwise would. And we're looking to tweak that basically based on the fact that the bylaw we have now, which is very good, was the model bylaw that the state introduced sometime around the time I was born, so a little bit ago now. I don't think there's been any changes, and basically what happened is when the state introduced that, the subdivisions being laid out were significantly larger than they are now. So that model bylaw is really set up if you were converting, say, an 85 to 100 acre farm into a subdivision. And as you scale down, there's less and less incentive for anybody to actually utilize that or do that. So speaking with some developers in town who have tried this option and then just our local know-how, we thought it was time for an update. So we'd like to overhaul that. This would introduce two separate options into the cluster. One being a standard lotted out development similar to a conventional subdivision, but again with more open space given to the town. And the other would be what would be more of a homeowners association type development. So you don't have to lot it out, but it allows a landscape architect or an engineer a lot more flexibility in design when laying out the development. So this one's a bit technical. I can answer any questions if anybody has any.
David? Gardner?
So Aaron Henry and I both serve on the Affordable Housing Trust, and while it's not for consideration now, the trust direction is to start working on these kind of changes to have inclusionary language. A cluster development or now a residential conservation development that adds 10 or 15 units to the town should have some responsibility for keeping our affordable housing stock and status whole. We shouldn't lose ground because someone builds a residential conservation development under these bylaws. Again, not for consideration now, I understand that, but it is a direction that the trust has voted on to have consideration for our next zoning, in preparation for our next zoning, to broaden the inclusionary zone or the language to other sections like this. Thank you.
Thank you.
Maureen?
No comment.
I got one question. Under 33.2 applicability,
Yes.
it says the planning board may grant a special permit for an RCD and R23. The following uses shall be permitted in an RCD. D, agricultural uses, I believe, are protected under state law. Does that not supersede local regulations?
The right to farm bylaw would exist outside of this and still be statutorily in effect, so you're covered there. I think this just makes explicit in the bylaw that you could have an orchard or an apiary or another type of use on that property. We just wanted to put it up front so people know if you're developing one of these, you could possibly expect some agricultural use.
But that isn't necessarily required to have permit from the planning board? Because
No,
it's
no.
a right granted by state law. Okay.
Yep.
So, Mr. Chairman, based on your
Yes.
question, you had an adoption of new language for severability. You can't, one doesn't supersede the, but what if there are conflicting, without intent, unintended conflictions? And I'm not saying this is one, but, the chairman, the temporary chairman has shown, talked about agricultural use, and if it's defined someplace else and you're allowed under one of these sections and not allowed on the other, what is the superseding process?
Well, if it's regulating the same thing and it's coming from the state would always supersede anything that we put in place. So I think, again, that doesn't have to be in there. We can take that language out. It was more just making it explicit to folks applying for it and potential homeowners in a type of development that there could be this type of use on your property. So.
Yeah, I wasn't arguing that specific designation. I was making a point about in general.
Sure. All right. And then Aaron already clued you in. We do need to update our definitions section, just adding a few things. One of the things that came out was we currently don't have a definition for primary use or principal use, so we'd like to add that. And then the bulk of this update is moving definitions from section 22 to section 40. So section 22 is the Maple Street overlay that was adopted, which has now been incorporated into sections 18 through 22, the character-based zoning districts. So that section came with, I think, 5 or 6 pages of definitions unto itself, just that section. So you'd be going halfway through the book and then come upon 5 to 6 pages of definitions only applicable to the preceding pages. We thought it was a little odd because you normally go to look for definitions in the definition section. So we'd like to move those to section 40. So again, nothing super shocking. It's just moving those definitions to the end into the definition section on this one.
Gardner?
In these definitions, section 40.2 talks a lot about, or it has multiple references to affordable housing, affordable unit, affordable homeowner unitship, and it just says that the, above it says it's as defined by MGL. I'm sorry, that was the question I was going to ask. I apologize. Thank you.
Okay.
I'm sorry. It says MGL, but is that really, does that mean the Boston area median income? Okay, thank you. I'm seeing Aaron nod his head. Thank you.
Sure. Okay, moving on. Aaron, if you don't mind, do you want to give an update for this one?
So this is our favorite, in-house we'll call this the GOAT article. But basically, this really is a change to section 40 definitions where we have performance standards in the definition today. I think today it's animal husbandry. We're going to change that up to keeping of animals, modernize that title. And then the only other place it appears is in the table of uses. So we've been working throughout the spring, or actually late winter into the spring, and then COVID kind of put this work on pause, and we did not decide to include it in the annual town meeting, given all the uncertainty. And we've been working with town council and the specific family that's been dealing with the goat issue. So we have no changes from what we did in the spring. The Board of Health was prepared to adopt new regulations for the keeping of animals. Those, in theory, go effective as soon as those are advertised. We were waiting to see how town meeting voted on the zoning piece of that before we advertise those. Mr. Bartha had mentioned earlier, we're going to ask that the Board of Health rehear that, just so that the public, the interested public that we saw, I think it was January, gets another chance. At that time, we had not decided on a fee, for example, and there was some concern from the public that we not set the fee too high to be prohibitive. And there was also probably the only change that you're likely to see to the Board of Health regulations on the keeping of animals would be a more express statement on beekeeping. As late in the process, it was pointed out to us that the keeping of bees was not addressed by either the bylaw or the Board of Health regulations, and so we're going to try to tackle that piece. But That would be the only change, otherwise that work is as we left it back in January, February, when COVID put everything on ice.
Any questions? Gardner?
I do not about this. I'm in favor of obviously, these changes. Something came up on Facebook this week, and what is the town's position on roosters?
No.
No, outside of obviously agriculture.
Yeah, under certain situations, we
Yeah.
don't have the right to regulate that, but in this bylaw, and now the benefit of having much of this body of work happen ahead of us is we can say with certainty that roosters are a pain in the butt when your neighbor has one. And so we are going to expressly prohibit roosters, so you can have your chickens, and there's a whole
Okay.
process for that, but no.
So there's going to
roosters.
be an express, right now, it's not express, but
Correct.
it will be express.
Yes.
But that lends itself to a philosophical discussion. Is everything by right unless prohibited, or is only those things in here allowed? So the fact that I went to the zoning bylaws of February 2020.
Yep,
Did a keyword search on rooster, found nothing.
correct.
Um,
So,
So is the omission of we don't say llamas either, we don't say
Right.
emus. So is it that the zoning bylaw identifies what you may do in a zone?
the approach here would be that it's generally permissive, but for a couple of things that we are expressly prohibiting. Roosters being the only one I can think of off the top of my head. I can't remember if there are any other specific animals that we say you cannot have. Generally speaking, so we're going to be permissive under zoning. Where the review will come in is your actual proposal to the Board of Health for the permit, and basically it's pest management, waste management, and the pens. And if
Okay.
those three things can be done in a reasonable fashion and don't introduce nuisance and, similar abutter concerns, then we're gonna say yes. And again, in 20 years, will we need to come back and say, who knew that, some animal ends up being a pest? But at this point, we tried to take, as the bylaw today is pretty permissive, we didn't try to change that general direction, but we just wanted to offer some clarity and about what we would be looking to regulate. And again, that's pest management, waste management, and the pens of the animal.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman,
Maureen, any questions?
I just want to point out real quickly, Section
Steve?
4D does explicitly state that the keeping of roosters is prohibited.
What page?
If you look at page 4, section,
I remember
it's the
reading it
general
there.
requirements, section 4D. The keeping of roosters, cockerels, and non-exempt wild animals in accordance with MGL is prohibited.
Oh, thank you, Steve.
Yep.
Didn't see that
There you go,
correctly.
thank you.
Okay, I've got a couple of questions. First of all, an observation. You are correcting a mistake that was made the last time our zoning regulations were changed, and are now going to be allowing by permit animals in residence 1, 2, and 3.
That is the proposal, obviously.
That's
town
correct.
meeting
That's
or
what I'm
the
saying.
process could.
Before, it was not allowed in residence 1. It used to be, it was allowed in residence 2 because I fought for it. And in residence 3, somehow I slipped by. That's the least dense neighborhood, and they had the most horses and the most animals in the town, and theoretically, they were not allowed to do that. So I'm glad that you've corrected that mistake, and also given an opportunity to people in residence 1, like the Raisleys, to have a few chickens if they want to. I direct your attention to page 1, section 2, purpose. I think you have a word in here that's incorrect, but you wouldn't have caught it with your word check. Small-scale agricultural protection. I think you should be using production.
We'll take a look.
You might want to check that word. It wouldn't come out on a word
Yeah,
check,
right,
okay?
yeah. It's spell check mark, doesn't know intent.
Okay. I'm very happy to see that this document that you proposed has corrected some mistakes that were made several years ago when we transferred from a narrative to a chart for most of the uses.
Yep.
And there were some mistakes and oversights that some of them got corrected, some of them have not been corrected. And I think it's close to 20 years since this was done. So it's glad that we're getting back to where we should be, and you've done a great job, I think, as far as going on. You've got a couple more things to go over with us, right?
Yes, I think I'll take the next one. And again, I think to that
Mr.
point-
Chairman?
Yes.
No.
Maureen was, I
I'm
interrupted
sorry,
Maureen to point out the rooster point, and I think she wanted to comment.
Yeah, no, I saw that in there too. There was no roosters.
I couldn't understand you.
I'm sorry, I've got a little, that's why I'm keeping my mask on too. No roosters too. I saw that in this draft.
Okay.
Yeah.
And we had a
Aaron?
complaint, just for what it's worth, I think in the last 2 weeks, we've had a rooster complaint out on the edge of town, and so we've had to deal with it. So it is a pertinent aspect of the bylaw. Seeing no further questions on the keeping of animals, I'll take the next one. Civic and open space. Now, this is a new proposal, and this is a little bit of a hobby horse of mine. When you look at your town's zoning bylaw, what that really is, from like a planner's perspective, is a future land use map. I mean, what you're telling the world is, at full build-out of this community, this map will tell you what you will find in these locations. And if you look at our zoning map, and we are not unique in this, there is no open space. We don't actually set aside any land. 100% of the land in Danvers is to be developed either single-family residential in either R1, 2, or 3. Another 20% of the town is in some sort of a commercial district, and then we have a couple of kind of special districts that were created over the decades, like 114A, 114B. Some derivatives are, based off of those kind of original zoning districts that we laid out probably 75 years ago now. And I think it's really important, at least, and I don't say this because I live in town, but that's not the town that I think people see in their heads. Would Plains Park, would you ever see a neighborhood or expect to find a neighborhood here? I don't think so. This is a vital aspect and contributes mightily to the character of the town. And I think going forward, you should think about these parcels as, let's lock them in. It's a little bit of defense that you can play in that should we be forced to deal with those properties, if they are zoned for development, they will be developed. And I think we have, and I tried to do the math, but the computer wasn't playing along with me, but I will say there's probably approaching 1,000 acres of land today in town that really is either active, passive, or some sort of civic institution, whether it be educational, institutional, or medical. Ideally, this proposal would include some of those properties that aren't necessarily owned by the town but serve a civic function. That's a conversation point, and I would not be surprised if through this conversation over the next couple of weeks, we pare that back a little bit and start small and maybe just start with properties that we control as a municipality and bring that forward into the civic or open space zoning district. But I also, and we just learned this in the last week or two, in a separate column, we're working with DEP on renewing our water withdrawal permit, and it turns out that you can get credit, meaning you can take more water out than you would, than the baseline agreement, if you have land in protected status. So there may be, and we have to dive more into that. I spoke with the town engineer today. He shared the language, the draft language that he's been receiving from DEP on that. We'll have to do some homework in order to take those credits, but I think a proposal like this would probably yield some beneficial outcomes for us on the water withdrawal permit. And I know that that's been a sticky widget here in town for a long time. And I think if we can do even a small action here and give us a marginal gain on that would probably be very beneficial for the community in and of itself. But again, for me, this is something that we need to talk about over the next couple of weeks to fine tune. But basically the concept here is, recognizing what I think these parcels contribute to the town and putting them in a zoning district that reflects that contribution to our character.
Any comments or questions?
So if you could help me out, a lot of the green on this map
Yep.
is privately owned, or at least owned not by the town.
Yep. This is the full expansive picture here. And
So if we declare that, I'm gonna pick a parcel up where the airport is.
Yep.
There's a lot of green, there's purple where they have actual business on the airport. And actually the purple is Cherry Hill, I can see the
Yep.
road that goes around.
Yep.
Below it is green, it's open space, it's the airport. What does the designation of open space district do to their property owner rights?
Yep. Similar to what Mr. Fields brought up earlier about state preemption, essential public services like utilities, educational, medical, religious uses, they all trump whatever we do. I mean, we could put them in R1, we can put them in commercial 3. It doesn't matter if they are exercising their rights under those exemptions. It doesn't matter what local zoning we have in place. They always be able to preempt us. On the converse side of that, most of those institutions, however, do contribute to the civic life we have here in town. And putting them in an appropriate zoning district that reflects that is the high-level concept. And again, I will tell you, that's a hard one to get over, and I would expect, if I had to bet, I would bet that we'll get pared back to not including all of those parcels. For purposes of 40A and scope for town meeting, you can't widen the scope as you have the conversation. You can only narrow the scope as you go ahead. So in order to preserve the most amount of room for conversation, we're starting wide, and we can focus it in and narrow it. But if we were to start small, and in 2 weeks the planning board or somebody else could, say, well, what about adding this sort of property to it? We'd be prohibited from doing that. So to your point, Gardner, similar to some of the other changes, nothing would change provided you continue to exercise your property rights in a fashion that preempts local zoning. It's a long time ago now for me, but I was once the planning director in the town of Milton. We talked about doing something like this as the archdiocese was starting to apparently need some funds for some settlements. And we thought, oh, that won't happen. And today, the town of Milton lost 4 churches, I think over 20 acres, roughly. I forget the specific number. I know one site was about 14 acres in and of itself. They got a unfriendly 40B, they got a subdivision on one of those sites, and had we exercised this in advance of that, they would not have been in a commercial zoning district, they would not have been in a residential zoning district. The diocese could have disposed of the property just as they did, but the person buying it would have had to come to town meeting and say, we're no longer going to be a church, we're no longer protected by 40A, Dover Amendment, we want to do a subdivision. And they would have had to explain to us why R1, R2, R3, or some other district would be an appropriate landing zone. So again, if they had sold to another church, it would have been moot, it wouldn't have mattered. They would have continued to enjoy their protection, and the zoning as contemplated as the civic side of this would have continued to make sense. So really, the broader concept is really a defense against unwanted dispositions of property by an institutional owner. As long as those owners continue to do what they're doing or sell to somebody that will do the same, it doesn't affect them. Now, that's not saying it's popular. Again, Milton did not go for it. I was successful. It took me 2 tries in Lexington to get this concept over. So I expect there'll be a lot of conversation over the next couple of weeks about how expansive to make this proposal. And again, we're starting wide, but we're happy to bring it down and narrow that. And
So I guess I still have a concern, and I'm just gonna stick with the airport.
Yep.
I don't know what it's zoned now, but I gotta assume it's some sort of commercial, one of the commercial zones, because that's what they
It's
do.
half
there.
and half.
Half and half, okay.
I think it's, bulk of it's in industrial too, but there is some residential.
Okay, but,
property.
and so, let's say a new, fly school wants to go in there, they wanna build something.
Yep.
You've got this in a green open space area, and they may, and they wanna build a new building,
Yep.
not pre-existing,
Yep.
or a new taxiway or something. What is their property right protection?
The table of uses would allow them to do what they need to do, and it would not affect them, and they're preempted from local zoning regardless of what we put in table 2, but that's part of this exercise, and is going through and making sure that we're correctly categorizing the land uses that can occur in these districts, and making sure that there is, when appropriate, development potential there.
And is it up to the homeowners or the property owners or whatever to say, I don't want mine in that zone? You know, what if someone in the middle of one of these large green, so I see Hawthorne Green.
Yep.
And I'm presuming that the little green dot in the middle of that is the cemetery. But surrounding that is the cornfields. And what if the owner of that property, and I don't know their particular nature of their property or the state regulations or anything surrounding it, what if they say, I want a subdivision? And today, I could do that because I'm zoned in a manner which allows that. But now you're going to change my designation. Are you saying that I still retain those property rights, but have a new, almost, I'm gonna say overlay? Is the open space and open space district an overlay district?
Nope, it would be.
It's a replacement.
It's a replacement. I hope I'm gonna answer this correctly. First, at the high level, in Massachusetts, oddly enough, you don't need the permission of the property owner to rezone them into something. Property owners always, through an owner's petition process, have the right to ask town meeting to be rezoned into either an existing zone or a new zone. And we'll talk about that momentarily, because we have 2 of those happening at this town meeting as well. But it's the community that gives you the property rights. That is what zoning does. The community can tell you what you can do and what you cannot do. And that can be over property owners' objections. Again, in a process like this, bringing this much change, I think if I had to guess where this conversation goes, again, I would expect us to whittle this down a little bit and not try to do this over everyone's objections if that's something that they would object to. And so again, I think I would talk to Steve today. We probably start smaller, but again, for the sake of the scope of the warrant, wanted to start expansive in case this idea is acceptable and we want to reserve that room. I think to your specific point on Hawthorne, I'd have to look more specifically. I'd have to zoom in on the map and look carefully, but I believe you already have a zoning district out there, Hawthorne West, that tells them what to do, and that is surrounded by R3. And some of that land that they did not sell off to Aria and Avalon stayed in the state's possession. So the green happening around that development is still owned, I believe, by the Department of Agriculture or the Hogan Center on the other side, on the Dayton Street side.
There's a substantial APR on that property that's agricultural.
Yep.
That was placed in there
Yep.
when we had the reuse of the State Hospital Committee. I believe there's 350 acres that are under
Surround,
APR
like that kind of does it.
along Dayton Street and around the hill.
Yep. Yep. And again, those are land use tools that also control, and that doesn't go away, this doesn't supersede that. Those properties would be subject to not only the APRs that are in play, they'd also be potentially subject to local zoning. Again, it would matter who owns it and what they're proposing as to whether or not our rules would apply. The APR would apply in any case. And that's, some of these, it's belt and suspenders. We have town-owned land that's owned by the Conservation Commission. That is protected by Article 97 of the state's constitution. We dealt with that earlier this year at the special town meeting when we conducted a land swap with the Danvers Historical Society over at Glen Magna. That's, again, another level of protection, but underneath that, the land was zoned R2 or R3. I apologize for not remembering exactly what the designation of Endicott Park is, but Endicott Park, as we know, was a subdivision, and we bought that subdivision with the Historical Society. It is still zoned for a subdivision. And this is, again, just another way to kind of clean that up and make clear what the community's looking for and expects from these parcels going forward. So I know I didn't answer everything directly, and I'm happy to have more conversations on the side. I'll probably bore half the audience and put them to bed with my wonkish planning talk, but happy to take any other questions on this.
I have a question on a piece of property that's contiguous with Endicott Park, and that's the St. Richard's Church property.
Yep.
It looks like that's green here now.
Yes.
Would that stop any surprise development as happened behind my house with the cemetery property that St. Mary's owned, where they sold off 15 acres and built 20 houses?
Should St. Richard's decide that they don't need as much parking and they would like to lop off one of their little parking areas, and they could do an A&R today, create that parcel without any public process, and it's already zoned, and that would be that. This, under this scheme, if you include the Dover amendments in here, they could still create that parcel, they could still sell that parcel, but the owner of that parcel would have to return to the community, to town meeting, and ask to be put in a zone that allows some sort of development, presumably the reason they would pursue the purchase in the first place.
Will the owners of properties that are thus affected be notified by the town specifically of this loss of right to their use of their property?
State law does not require us to notify property owners of a pending zoning change unless they have filed a notice with the town clerk to be notified of that instance. And I've not worked in a community where I've ever seen a property owner file such a petition. That's not to say we couldn't do that, and such an expansive changes might warrant that, but we're not required to do so. We do have to put notice in the paper, as a zoning change, so hopefully property owners are paying attention, but we could contemplate doing such a mailing.
Because this has a potential for several $1 million for the property owner.
Yep. No, it definitely needs to be discussed, and again, like I said, I would be surprised if this makes it to town meeting without modification. But it is, and again, I guess to make a pitch for it, it is an advanced concept. This is not zoning 101. This is probably a 501 course. This is in the second half of the book. But I think it's an important one, and I think it sets a tone for what you want to do and what you want to protect going forward. And if we can't get there in this crack, I'm okay with that. I think this is something that we can build on, and there is probably, hopefully, something that is palatable to the boards and committees that we will be discussing it with over the next couple of weeks. Because I do think it's an important concept. And again, for me, the lesson learned here was my experience in Milton when we had a lot of head shaking and thinking it would never happen, and then it happened. And it wasn't a result that the community was pleased with. And I'm not trying to play Chicken Little, but it happens. And in 2 slides, we'll be talking about the state coming at you to dispose of a property that they feel they no longer need, and they would like that property rezoned. And this would basically kind of create that sort of standard for any such property owned by an institution that's not subject to local zoning, but has a local zoning designation that is a commodity on the open market that we might not realize is out there.
So I own one of these areas in a green zone. I currently, whatever my zoning is, am I grandfathered in for my own use? So if I'm in a piece of property that would allow for 2 families or a subdivision or whatever it is, is this really as soon as you stop using the land, it reverts to the designation of open space district?
You're always grandfathered. I mean, if we change your zoning, and I don't, just to be clear, I don't believe this is, I won't say it's not, because I don't know every single parcel, but I built this map over the last 6 to 9 months. I do not believe there is a single-family home or a 2-family home in this zoning district. This is Tennessee Gas, Boston Edison, cemeteries, things of that nature. So I don't believe there's any homeowner, but similar to what we talked about earlier, should any property be rezoned and you're a single-family home and you now find yourself in the open space district, you can keep doing what you're doing. We cannot take that right away from you. If you then discontinue that use, that could lead to you needing to come into conformity with the zoning district that you find yourself in. But again, essential public services, educational and other institutional uses, those would be allowed in this zoning district, and we would, so again, it wouldn't affect your rights to do what you're doing.
I mean, it looks to me like the first step should be those properties that are owned by the state, owned by the town, as a start, but there's a lot of property here that is not owned by the state, not owned by the town. For example, surrounding the Putnamville Reservoir is a large swath of green land.
Yep.
That the city, excuse me, of Beverly would say, hey, we realize we have certain things we can and cannot do in there, but you're actually changing the use of that. Across the street where we've got some of that open orchard area, and you know, what if the owner, you know, I don't know who owns that orchard, the Miriam Cooper orchard, and that land that's around there.
At Joe Farm?
Is it?
It's a town land.
Okay, all of that's town land?
Part of Choate Farm that we
Okay,
bought.
I guess I would want to see which of these green parcels that you're representing are privately owned.
Yeah, yep, can do, happy to do that. Yep.
And I think that this discussion right here should indicate to you that there needs to be clarity about property
Yep.
owner rights
No,
and
absolutely.
protecting those.
I expected to have a little bit of a stop on this one.
Okay,
And again, I'm not trying to pull wool over on anybody on this one. This is a significant concept, and I think it's worth having the conversation, and if we can't get to where I think we should be, I am okay with that. We want to have a process and a conversation, and if it gets pared back, it gets pared back. It's what the community wants ultimately, not what we're proposing day one.
Maureen, any questions, any
No, I
comments?
like what Gardner said, excuse me, about designating, you know,
Yeah.
those properties.
And we
That
can-
would be great. Please, Aaron. Thank you.
Make that happen. And again, I think that's what, just for full disclosure, that's what we ended up doing in the last town I worked in, is we did federal, state, and local land only, and we didn't get to some of the other categories, just because, again, we didn't want to bite off more than we could chew, and it was significant enough that it, you know, I think the point was made by doing what we did. So if we're on a track, that's perfectly fine.
Oh, great job. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any questions, any more comments?
just one more, as I look at the map, I see right of way, you know, it's grayed out because it's roadways, I
Yep.
get that, except there's large swaths of gray that aren't roads.
That's all, are you seeing kind of to the left of the reservoir?
Yes,
That's all, those are the two highway lines. That's
Okay.
Route 1 and 95.
oh, I see, they diverge.
Yep.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Okay, and I think I can turn it back to David for the two owners' petitions. Yeah. Well, all right. So if there's questions on the specifics of the Mass DOT request, I'll have to defer to David because he's been working with the state on this. This is an area bounded by Route 1, Center Street, State Road, I believe is what we call that.
Armory Road.
Armory Road?
Yeah.
Armory Road, and Dayton Street. It is now part of the right-of-way for Route 1, so they'll have to do some administrative work to actually carve this out of the right-of-way. We're working with them on that. That won't be a town meeting action item, but, so basically, they'd like to zone this. I think they're proposing highway corridor zone, which is consistent with what would, the bulk of Route 1 is. I think there's industrial park, industrial 1 is just a little further north, but generally speaking, the Route 1 corridor is highway corridor zone. And we don't have much of an understanding of what it is they're trying to do. The state, similar to the Avalon redevelopment, the state has to go through a fairly regulated disposition process. And we, you know, we'll monitor that, but we would not, should we affirm this at town meeting, we'd just kind of be watching and see what happens and who is a successful bidder. On the right, we have a proposal that we received just yesterday, I think, formally. We've been talking with the landowners on and off over the last year, and I apologize, the scale of the map is a little hard to read, but I wanted to make sure you could see enough of the surrounding area to understand where we're talking about. To the bottom right of the corner is Sapinos. The white kind of inverted L-shaped building just above that is the state police barracks. In the top left corner is the parking lot for Essex Tech where they house their buses, and the hospital facility, the Leahy Outpatient Clinic, is directly below the highlighted parcels. There are 3 parcels there. It's actually hard to see. That first triangle in yellow is actually 2 parcels. 490 Maple Street is a very small parcel. The second parcel there, 492, is the parcel that contains the post office. And then you skip over an electrical substation and a little driveway down to the power lines, which is that long rectangular parcel kind of running behind. And you get to 500 Maple Street, which is currently a small commercial operation. It's non-conforming. All 3 of these parcels are currently in the R3 zoning district. All 3 are non-conforming in that district, and they're working, the property owners, 3 different property owners are working with Attorney McCann and have petitioned us to be moved into C1 zoning district. One of the concerns that we've had with this, the original request was likely to be highway corridor zone, but the lot sizes associated with highway corridor are very, very large, such that these parcels would be immediately non-conforming in that district. And so we encourage the property owners to investigate the zoning bylaw and try to find a landing zone, either one that's in the book already or create a new one that doesn't introduce so many nonconformities right out of the gate. And so they've determined that C1 is probably the best landing zone for them. We are at the very beginning of this conversation with these property owners, so at this moment the planning staff is unsure what they're looking to do there. We've been told some sort of retail or commercial activity. It's a fairly broad description of what's likely to happen. We know through just conversations with the development community, the triangle to the, I'll say, west of Sapinos that was recently rezoned. I want to say that was 3 years ago, maybe. We did the triangle to the west and north of Sapinos into highway corridor, and there's been some interest in office or maybe like a fast food kind of thing, like a coffee or something to that affair. So I'm not sure if that's what they're thinking, and again, I say that I'm not trying to poison the well on what they're looking to do, but as far as a landing zone, C1 would at least dimensionally bring these lots the closest that they can possibly be to conforming out of the gate. And so obviously we'll have to have more conversations through the public hearing process about if that zone is determined to be something that we would support or not.
Aaron, I would note too that the corridor that we're looking at is part of the phase 3 for the rail trail project,
Yeah.
correct? That we'll be starting in the spring in the downtown and making our way out using the balance of our MassWorks grant. And if this corridor here would eventually be the 3rd phase that would tie us into Middleton.
Yep.
And we should probably, I'm thinking we should probably denote that on the map for moving
Sure.
forward.
Maureen, any questions?
No?
David? Gardner?
I'm all set.
Thank you very much, Aaron.
No worries.
We appreciate your
We
hard
did
work tonight.
questions as we went, so this slide we didn't need, but we didn't want 13. We wanted a better number than 13, so. All right.
We've
Thank you
come a
very
long
much.
ways since our discussions in Josh's living room many years ago on politics.
I love those conversations.
Aaron,
Thank
could
you
you
all
go?
very much. And should, you need any reading
Aaron.
material or,
Is it too late for you to bring the timeline slide back up for just a moment?
it is not too late. We just have to give you 35 seconds to reboot everything.
Mr. Chairman, before we move off, we do, there are 2 items that we need to consider tonight. The first is closing the warrant for this town meeting on November 16th, and the recommendation would be Friday, October 9th at noon. So any articles that were going to be added to the warrant that we just reviewed would be due by that date. And then as was mentioned at the beginning of the meeting, we received the petition yesterday. The clerk's office is reviewing the signatures to confirm that the 200 signature threshold has been met. I believe it's likely that will be met, considering that there are 450 signatures on the petition. As was mentioned, Kathy did ask the petitioners if they would consider adding that item to this town meeting. They declined, stating that they wanted to have a town meeting for that question within the 45 days. This would have been about 2 weeks outside of the 45 days to add it to our November 16th meeting. So the board also needs to choose a date tonight to hold the special town meeting, assuming the signature threshold has been met. And that would need to occur prior to October 29th. And given past practice of conducting town meetings on Mondays at 7:30 p.m., we would probably want to avoid October 12th, which is a holiday. So we'd be looking at October 5th, October 19th, or October 26th as potential dates for the special town meeting that was delivered to you this evening.
Is there any preference that people want for that town meeting, special town meeting?
Question.
Yes,
Do we have to change, do we have to, given that that's a special town meeting, do we have to close a warrant for that town meeting?
I do not believe so, because it was a citizen's petition for a specific purpose.
So other people couldn't try to offer a citizen's petition for that event?
And that wouldn't make, I believe the answer is no, but considering we have a special town meeting on the 16th, anyone who wished to pursue a special town meeting warrant would have an opportunity to do it.
Okay.
I can clarify that. I don't have an answer to that.
If you wouldn't mind, because
Sure.
we would need to, if this is even though it's a special town meeting, it is a town meeting, and we allow for citizens petitions at those town meetings, and therefore would we have to close a warrant for that date? If we choose a date, I'm going to pick one out of the three that you discussed. If we picked 10/26, do we have to then back up and close a warrant for the 10/26 town meeting? Even though it's a special town meeting, doesn't necessarily mean it is specific and only to that topic.
As I think about the question, the board has the jurisdiction to call the town meeting on a date of its choosing. And I have to believe, and again, I would need to consult with Dave DeLuca, that if the board chose, once a town meeting day was established, to add items to that town meeting, they would have the authority to do so. And if that's true, then by extension, I believe someone else would also have the ability to go through the petition process. But I'll clarify that with the attorney in the morning, and I'll send a note out to the board. So I guess it could make sense to choose both a special town meeting date tonight and a closing date for that warrant, if indeed it is possible for other items to be added to that warrant. And
So I'll make the motion that we set this special town meeting to October 26th, which will give us time for you to clarify those dates. I will say that I'm disappointed that we couldn't utilize 2 weeks later the scheduled town meeting, because this is going to come at a cost of over $10,000 to the taxpayers of Danvers for a single item. So I would have thought that the petitioners, who all look to fiscal responsibility, are pushing for this not to happen 2 weeks later and save the town over $10,000. Thank you. So I've made the motion for 10/26.
David?
I know I should know, and this is a stupid question, but all the items that are currently scheduled for the November town meeting, can they be folded back into an October 26th town meeting so that we end up having a single town meeting?
I asked that question of Aaron when the response came back that they were not willing to add their item to the town meeting that was planned earlier this year. The question was, could we accelerate? And the issue is that the November 16th meeting was built around so many standing meetings to have the appropriate review and approval by the planning board and the selectmen and the finance committee and the board of health. We would be disrupting all of those standing meetings to accommodate this new request. And we have public hearing notice requirements and the like that go into any time you're adjusting the zoning. So although the gentleman described much of what we're doing in the zoning as sort of cleaning up and housekeeping, a lot of work has gone into that, and we don't want to inadvertently, fumble the ball and have some of that not prepared by sort of deciding at the last minute to accelerate our town meeting. So I think if that item isn't added to the standing town meeting, then we're looking at having 2 town meetings, one in October and one in November.
Are there non-zoning items, to build off of David's question, are there non-zoning items that are in this upcoming one that can be added to that and minimize the time we have at the special town meeting? Let me rephrase that, at the November town meeting, zoning board. Literally, I mean, if we have the opportunity to front-load some stuff, get it off the docket for the night of, which I think will be robust discussion for some of these zoning changes, can we do that?
The changes to the wetland bylaw, because that's technically a general bylaw, does not have the same statutory requirements around public hearing notice and all of that. So you could, and I think that's ready. We could be there, and then the other one would be, and we haven't touched base with them on this, would be whether or not engineering would be ready to move the stormwater changes, if they could go faster than what they're looking at.
Okay,
But in theory, those are both general and could probably slide.
Well, from my perspective, I would ask that we try to move things that we can to this October 26th date, assuming that it's approved by the board, because if we're going to spend $10,000 extra plus or minus, we might as well utilize that meeting to its fullest extent and minimize the other meetings' length, so we can have a more focused review on those zoning issues that are more detailed and more thoughtful, as it were.
I think it would be appropriate if someone would second the October 26th meeting date as a potential, so that we can continue the discussion. David, you second that?
Judge Mills?
I have a specific question of you, Aaron. Could the animal husbandry part of that zoning change be brought up for the 26th? It's a separate issue, and I think you've got everything put together for it.
Yeah, you're correct. That could go forward. We would need to know that soon, though. We'd have to get that to the newspaper and get that rolling. So.
I suggest that we add the animal husbandry item to that 26th meeting, so that would front load at least that off the table for the larger discussion of zoning changes.
I would agree. Town meeting should, if we're going to call people, we want to maximize the meeting and make sure as many people as town meeting members can get there. So I would agree, and if the town manager, I would ask that the town manager can identify other items that can be pulled forward to that meeting. We do so without jeopardizing public meetings, comment periods, things of that nature. If we're forced into 2 different ones, then maximize the 2.
We'll work on that. Yep.
So we have time to explore that further before our next meeting anyway, right? Or before our next meeting.
Well, I think the planning board will meet between now and our next meeting. But we will, I can reach out tomorrow morning to Attorney DeLuca to confirm the ability that it becomes the selectmen's warrant outside of the article that's been submitted by special petition. And I want to give these guys the night and the morning to think through what we're talking about right now, so that we're not, again, dropping something at the last minute here.
Okay.
But I think what we'll look to do with your latitude is, by the time the planning board is ready to start their review, to the extent that we can divide up the workload between the 2 meetings, we'll have done that.
Any other comments? So I'll take a vote on the October 26th date for a special town meeting.
Aye.
Aye?
Aye.
Aye, okay, it's 4-0. Okay, is that all set? Thank you very
I
much.
was just going to say thank you so much for the time. We appreciate it. We know you've got a lot going on, and zoning's not always the most exciting topic, so we appreciate you being able to set aside a fair amount of time tonight to talk about it. And should you need any, nighttime reading, you could dive into those red lines a little bit more, and that'll help you fall asleep. If you have any questions when you're reviewing that and something hits you tomorrow or in a week from now, don't hesitate to reach out to us. Again, we want these proposals to be well understood and supported, and whatever we can do to help get you there, we'll do for you.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, sir.
Before we move off of that, I would like to suggest that the board also vote to close that warrant on October 9th at noon. So both warrants would close on the same date. It won't be, that keeps it from becoming confusing, and it allows a couple of weeks to finalize the materials for town meeting.
Mr. Chairman, I'll make that motion that we close both warrants for both special town meetings on October 9th at noon.
Second. Any more discussion?
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Passes 4-0. Thank you very much. Thank you, Steve, for that additional item. At this point, if they could turn the lights on somehow so we can see the paper in front of us, would be great. Number 11, the town manager will report to the board on various items of interest. The town manager.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have a few items tonight. First, I'm going to give a little shout out to our assistant town manager, Jen Breaker. She found out today that she had been appointed to the ICMA's Assistants and Deputies Advisory Board, which is appointed by the Executive Director of the ICMA, which, for those at home, is the International City and County Manager Association. So she'll be joining a committee of assistant city managers and town managers from across the country and working with the Executive Director on professional development and career opportunities for assistants, civic education, and I think that her work on the Citizens Academy last year was of particular interest to them. So that's an exciting opportunity for her. We just got word today that that was happening. We also got word today that the town has received, for at least the 15th year in a row, the GFOA Award for excellence in financial reporting on the CAFR for our audit. I think that's important for two reasons. One, preparing those audits to comply with GFOA is the best you can do in terms of transparency in your financial reporting, and it's also a point of pride for our finance staff. So each year they go through the process. It's a rigorous process. They turn in we complete the audit, then they prepare the CAFR, which is reviewed by an independent group of finance directors from across the country. So that was very exciting for them as well today. We did receive notice today from the AG's office, and I did email this around late in the day, that the open meeting law violation complaints that were filed this summer were dismissed by the AG. These were complaints filed against the way that the planning board was conducting its business this summer, and they found no violation of the amended open meeting law as part of that. So I know that land use staff was relieved because they worked hard to try to make sure that they were doing the best they could to comply, and the AG's office supported the approach that they adopted. And then lastly, this is very last minute, but we have the North Shore Chamber of Commerce has their State of the Region tomorrow morning. It's normally at Danversport. Unfortunately, we're not hosting this year. And admittedly, up until 2 days ago, I thought it was going to be remote like everything else these days, but it will be in a tent somewhere in Topsfield. So we'll be getting together to talk about the year that was, and I'll be focusing in a little bit on our pandemic response, the work, the growth and redevelopment we're seeing in the downtown, and some of our community engagement efforts. And as I'll be saying, I know it's only been 1 year since our last State of the Region, but my goodness, it feels like it's been 10 years since last September. So that's all that I have tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Town Manager. The board will consider consent calendar items that appear below.
Mr. Chairman, I move we
Motion to
accept the consent calendar items as they appear below.
Is there a second?
Second?
Second. Any discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Correspondence, Selectmen's new business, previous new public business, updates, and Selectmen's closing comments. David?
Nothing, thank you.
Gardner?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's been a eventful 2 weeks. And I wanted to, I know we had the community meeting, community conversation, but some information has come out or been understood that may not have been fully realized at the time. I think David Mills put a letter to the editor that had some thoughts that got me to look at and investigate some issues. And The statement, I'm going to give a brief statement, but I have checked with the town manager to make sure any statement I make about employee actions are accurate and not just conjecture or perception or opinion. There's a lot of discussion circulating about the recent removal of a single thin blue line flag from a Danvers town fire truck. And unfortunately, a lot of that narrative has become manufactured outrage. It's tearing our community apart. Here are some basic facts, stripped down for your consideration. On August 30th, the State Firefighters Union posted a memo that requested that local firefighting stations fly the thin blue line flag, the design resembling an American flag in gray and black with a line through it, the bottom picture here, as a protest, in part, and I'm quoting them, anti-labor legislation on Beacon Hill. You can actually see their memo on www.pffm.org. 1 week later, a firefighter placed the flag in question, this bottom flag, on the back of one truck. This firefighter did not ask permission or receive approval to do so. Within a week, a resident saw that specific flag design, the one on the bottom, and contacted Town Hall with a concern about the symbol violating the U.S. flag code. Shortly after, another concern was raised about the negative connotation of that specific flag design to many people of color. The town manager, under the Town Manager Act of 1949, is responsible for all employees of the town and responsible for approving all use of town property and equipment. Under this authority, he asked for the removal of that single unauthorized flag with this design. Now, an important distinction needs to be made because there's a lot of confusion and, frankly, a lot of intentional misinformation, including what we heard tonight, about this point. In 2018, a decal with the top design was placed on fire and police equipment in memory of a fallen officer and in support of Danvers Police. This decal is a black rectangle with a field with a horizontal blue line. This decal was never mentioned by the town manager, was never asked to be removed, and remains as a proud symbol on many town vehicles today. After the town meeting made this request, the fire union refused removal and posted their displeasure at the direction to remove the flag, citing it as a symbol of support for the police. That same day, a local town meeting member started posting on Facebook with false narrative about the removal being an intentional act of disrespect to the Danvers Police. He twisted what was a managerial action into a false narrative that had not previously been a local issue. Before this uproar, the average citizen would not have suggested the town manager or the select board hated or maligned the police. No one ever heard any local official suggest we defund our local police department, and aside from normal contract negotiations, the town manager and select board have always been acted in a supportive manner. This is affirmed by the president of the fire union, who says the same, that he doesn't feel that the select board or the town manager has any animosity towards the firefighters. The local media was tipped off at the same time and reported on the issue, after which the town manager then issued a public statement in response. It's online and you can see what that is. After the media stories broke out, the town manager and select board started receiving emails. Some of these emails were in support of the removal, some were against the removal, and some were filled with profanity and direct threats to the town manager and his family. The fervor was such that a select board hosted a community conversation to hear directly from the community. Everyone who attended was invited and welcome to speak. When all was said and done, more than 200 emails came into Town Hall on this subject, more than I've seen on any single subject in my 15 years as a selectman. And 30 people spoke at that community conversation. Of those 200 emails and 30 people, more than 55% have expressed support for the removal of that specific flag design, for varied reasons. The bottom line is this. This flag, the one on the bottom, started as a political statement. It was requested by the State Firefighters Union to fly as a protest of anti-labor legislation on Beacon Hill. When you request a flag be flown in protest, that makes it political from the moment it was installed. It is a false narrative to suggest now that it was installed purely as a symbol of police support. Please, let's stop the narrative that this is an act that shows the town manager and most members of the select board disrespect and hate the police because of the removal of this piece of fabric, this single flag. Let's stop equating a national narrative to the way we treat our local professionals. Danvers is not Portland. Danvers is not Chicago. Danvers is not Seattle. Let's stop using this subject to bring national politics for a specific candidate literally to the steps of Town Hall. Town Hall is not the place to organize a Trump rally. Let's stop pretending that the specific design is universally accepted purely as a symbol of police support. And let's stop demanding that this design be returned and placed on taxpayer property with disregard to the large number of citizens who not only pay those taxes, but also see this design as a hurtful and hateful symbol. No one is protesting the top design. I recognize that some may feel categorizing this as simply a managerial act disregards the argument that the flag was placed as a symbol of support for our police. But consider this. If a new flag went up for the very first time in August as an act of support for the police, then why was there no publicity? Why was there no ceremony? Why was there no ribbon cutting? Why was there no proud declaration to the citizens of Danvers that this flag was going up in support of police or in memory of a fallen officer? And why was there absolutely no mention of this flag going up on the DPD, the Danvers Police Department, Danvers Fire Department, or Danvers Fire Department Union Facebook page when it was installed? No one installs a brand new flag as a symbol of support in silence or in secret. Thank you.
Thank you, Gardner.
Maureen, any comments?
No comments.
At this time, as I have done for the last 15 years, I'd like to recognize a former dedicated town employee who passed in the last 2 weeks, Officer Warren McCarthy of the Police Department, who was a very dedicated World War II vet and a long-term member of the Police Department, passed away. We will miss him. At this time, I'd also like to not only recognize the veterans for their service to our country, but also to the victims of the 9/11 attack 19 years ago on September 11th, 2001. Our memory goes with them, and we would appreciate people honoring their memory. Is there any other comments tonight? Entertain a motion to adjourn?
Move to adjourn?
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
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 Opposed? Good night, Danvers. Thank you very much.